Hey guys, wanted to give you part 2 of Joey Rockets versus Streets LA. Got some bad news for you. There is no definitive verdict. The judge said she had so much to absorb and digest that she wanted to take a day to do it. So tomorrow is when the actual verdict will happen. There's nothing more. There's no communication. There's no more arguments left to be had. So luckily tomorrow you are guaranteed that verdict, and of course I will give it to you. And guys, just a quick little request of support if you want to. Got a lot of cases tomorrow as well as next week with DOA tomorrow, Danny next week, Josiah as well, Aja. So if you want to help and support with a little, few little crappy motels, I got the Venmo, PayPal, all that jazz. So we'll start with the conclusion, the closing arguments of William Good's attorney. She remarked, and a lot of this conversation boils down to the son, because it's all dynamics, because what William Good's attorney has proven, this is talked about in her testimony, oddly enough, all of these incidences that are so-called harassment towards Joey, all of the incidents take place outside on a public thoroughfare. Not only on a public thoroughfare, but one of the most heaviest pedestrian trafficked public thoroughfares, public sidewalks in the country. You know, a lot of areas are not pedestrian friendly, but one of the most famous areas for people to walk around in is Hollywood Boulevard. So to say that your client is being harassed based on 3 public interactions in public where free speech is at the center of it all, again, it's a stretch of an argument. So William Good's attorney remarks upon William's story, because there's all this dynamic about the son stuff, who brought up who about whose son. It's been proven that that William brought up Joey's son first, who was estranged from him. The lawyer tried to make an argument that that was not cool, that he kind of started the whole mess. But of course, Joey in response says, "I pray for your son." So the attorney for William says, at 23 years old, William's son was gunned down. There's a lot of press about this. There was concern that his son was assassinated due to Good's actions against this police. This is the worst experience of his life. And Mr. Eckers admitted he researched Good before. Mr. Eckers follows, tough with this pronunciation, I'll just say Streets, follows Streets and sees a kid. And remember, this, he's talking about this incident where there's a gaggle of about 10 younger kids. Streets then gaggle of a bunch of younger kids. Streets tells them Joey is a troublemaker, and he tells the kids to get out, and tells Joey that as well. Streets was concerned the kids were blocking the sidewalks, and he didn't want the law to be broken. So what she's saying here is, even in the midst of protests, William was concerned about following the letter of the law, that this gaggle of kids, which serves as another focal point of the reason for this TRO, of them chastising Joey, that William was trying to get them out of the way and to make sure that within his right to protest, that his side wasn't doing anything illegal in particular, and that Joey kind of kept coming back towards the kid. And it should be noted, Eckers follows Streets, and Streets tells the protesters to ignore Joey, ignore him. He's heard telling the protesters, and he tells them to stop chanting "Save the dog." So he's telling them, so what she's trying to do is she's trying to make a key differentiation. Again, the actions of these kids are not in line, and they're not responsible for William's actions, and they should not be factored into this judgment on this TRO. In fact, William went out of his way to get the kids to stop chanting, to not say "Save the dog." So any harassment of Joey's dog, even though I would argue he wasn't being harassed, that's not tangential to this case, quite frankly. So another incident, and I'll continue the quote from the attorney. On January 6th, Eckers files his police report, where he said Streets committed battery. But there's no evidence of physical battery, of touching, nor did Streets ever get close enough. Meaning, Streets' attorney brings up a fair point. The attorney was talking about how Joey was such a victim, and was even spent an entire day in jail because he was falsely accused of battery. It should be noted, before that time, 4 times previously, Joey had attempted to file a criminal charge against Streets LA. There wasn't enough evidence for any of these requests, but it was Joey who was the first person to go to the police, not to his success. So the attorney continues, and the judge asked if this one incident of January 17 with all the kids we're just talking about is enough for a restraining order. It's not. because harassment is not defined. The definition from the Civil Harassment Restraining Order Code, it says these words are protected by the First Amendment. If all these incidences are protected by the First Amendment, if it is harassment, for example, it has to be part of a pattern, meaning if there's harassment, there has to be this very consistent pattern. It can't be this one-off incident or even three-off incidences of specific times of exercising free speech. But the Church of Scientology has harassed people and has been violent. Because of how harassment is fine, for example, harassment requires a pattern, but it's all in one incident. Just because William said fuck around an elder doesn't make it elder abuse. Remember, Joey's attorney was trying to say when you say fuck, that essentially is an act of violence, and that in turn is an act of harassment. These exact words, as I quote, William's attorney kind of turns that around. Just because somebody said fuck doesn't make it abuse of an elder. It cannot sustain an elder abuse restraining order, and quite frankly, it's abuse of the statute. And she further goes on to detail the back and forth. She also says, Eckers says he saw cars following him, which might have been paranoia on the side, and then he had a panic attack. He calls his friend, the Church of Scientology security guard. Later on, Joey sees Chris Without a Hellcat. So Chris Without a Hellcat is involved in this. And he says he warns Chris Without a Hellcat not to follow William around. Joey, from his own testimony, says he walked all the way over to talk with the protest, meaning that even before William got there, Joey walked all the way over to Chris Without a Hellcat and told him not to interact with William and not to protest. One could argue that's again interfering with William's right to protest, as she says specifically. In the 1 a.m. hours, protesters were already there. So the claim that this is too late and nobody was on the street is simply untrue. Joey admits he was even watching the stream before he got there. William saw a police stop. So he saw this police stop and crossed the street to film. Then Joey walks towards where Streets LA is. Streets continues to have a back and forth with Joey as he crosses the street. And Joey is yelling at him in return. The man who says he was terrified walks over to the group of protesters at 1 a.m, says the attorney. Mr. Eckers is a spry and vibrant man, says his attorney. And on January 19th, and on January 19th, Mr. Eckers visited the police station apparently a multitude of times. When he is at the station following this restraining order, William arrives and points and says, I have a restraining order against him. William quickly leaves. So meaning Joey was at the police station first. William coincidentally shows up, and then Joey immediately screams, I have a restraining order, and then William turns around and goes the other direction. Doesn't sound like he was walking to try to harass them. The mental distress Joey claims Mr. Eckers has not given evidence of. And it was these protesting kids that caused this apparent mental distress, again, of which there is no evidence. The entire version of Joey's events is a fabrication and abuse of the process. On the last day of the hearing, it was noted that Will gets money from his efforts. But he has provided mutual aid, he's gotten protesters out of jail, and none of this points to the merits of the restraining order, regardless. And it shows that Eckers interfered with his right to protest. Hours of footage show an ongoing argument, and Joey claims that he's not associated with the Church of Scientology, and that on December 3, that was the first incident between Joey and Streets, that this was his first Church of Scientology event. He got gifted tickets to New Year's as well at that event, and other events. When I asked Joey if he was being paid by Scientology, I did not ask if Scientology was paying a portion of the fees. I asked, do you have a personal relationship with the Church of Scientology to pay the legal fees? Joey says yes. So what she's saying is, she didn't say that they're paying all of the fees or anything like that. She's saying, do they pay part of it? Do you have a relationship? Of which Joey openly admitted yes. So he directly negated himself, or the lawyer directly negated Joey's testimony. It's clear, and I quote the attorney of Streets, he's an agent of the Church of Scientology. We're here on the 5th day of this trial, and Joey says that he's a sad old man, and that this football player is so mean. Evidence shows that Joey routinely carries water for the Church of Scientology, meaning that they create sympathy points for this guy who appears elderly, and the Church of Scientology is able to then pick these protesters off one by one. Eckers admitted in testimony he never saw Streets follow him home or even try to contact him. All interactions are on a public street. All have been, as I mentioned, and all have been documented. Eckers say he's not part of the Church of Scientology or even a supporter of theirs. This order will prevent William from protesting. Joey only has to show up. Joey is no victim. He's an active participator, and despite the fact that Joey researched William's son's death, yes, Joey has a right to do this, as William had a right to mention Joey's son. All of this is allowed in a public protest. Joey can't say he's a victim of elder abuse when he gave it as good as he got it. Great line, I'll read it again. And she says Joey can't say he's a victim of elder abuse when he's given it as good as he's gotten it. He says William creates panic attacks. But in an interview with a Los Angeles Times reporter, there's an interview that Joey had with a reporter. He told the reporter, when asked about William, all he wants Streets to do is to show contrition. He did not ask for a temporary restraining order, or simply for him to leave him alone. He asked, separate from the quote, he asked for contrition. So this is a key point. In addition to the words, the sticks and stones sticks and stones are made for bones, but words will never hurt me. In addition to that, where Joey essentially gave permission for these verbal attacks, when asked what he wanted Streets to do, he simply said, show contrition. He did not say for Streets to leave him alone. Perhaps if Streets got that in a public article and read that and thought, wow, he really wants me to leave him alone, maybe Streets would have. Or maybe if Streets didn't and still had interactions with him, maybe there'd be an argument for this restraining order. But even when asked, even when pressed, Joey simply says he wants Streets to show contrition, not for Streets to not interact with him anymore. Remember, all the words you say can and will be held against you in a court of law. And this is exactly what's happening. Joey seemed excited upon talking to the reporter and asked if the interview was live. This is not conduct of somebody who is scared, nor is it one of somebody who doesn't want to be filmed. He's funded by the Church of Scientology. Joey has filed this to wage a proxy battle. And it goes on. I thought this would be a short video, guys, but I guess it's not. The legislator created elder abuse to protect people from harassment, especially people who don't have the faculties to advocate for themselves. This court is being used as a battlefield to silence my client. Joey is being used to send a message to anyone daring to challenge against the Church of Scientology. So this now, Joey's attorney is able to remark with rebuttals. He said opposing counsel, this is Joey's attorney talking, called my client a straw man. This is interesting because she specifically said in a previous testimony of the attorney that Joey was essentially a straw man. And Joey's attorney takes offense to that. Opposing counsel has called my client a straw man. He's a real man. And he suffered abuse and anxiety attacks. His 4 friends testified that so. He is a talented animator, he is a kind man, and he is a close friend. So he's trying to say, how dare you almost dehumanize my client Joey by not calling him a man, but instead calling him a straw man. Again, guys, a bit of a stretch. And the attorney for Joey says, the burden of proof is on the First Amendment because I cited it in the majority of opinions. But there's language in from what Streets has said about malicious intent. So he's saying the language is malicious intent, and this isn't necessarily having to do with the First Amendment. Here's another interesting sentence, and I want you to listen to this, that Joey's attorney spews out. He said, Mr. Good acted with the wish to vex and annoy. Vexatious. Remember, we keep hearing vexatious. Man, I got a decent vocabulary. I don't even know what vexatious means. I assume vexatious would mean vex to create a spell against somebody and inconvenience them in, some sort of voodoo something, or using your OTA powers, whatever it might be. I heard vexatious maybe once in my life. Vexatious has been used in the legal arguments of attorneys openly identifying with Scientology. The attorney for Joey says there's no such connection. Yet this one sentence, wish to vex and annoy. Vex is so random and out of the ordinary and peculiar, almost that indicates that there's a direct relationship, quite frankly, and they might be even writing the whole kit and caboodle. Mr. Good said the Church of Scientology paid for everything. That is not true. Mr. Good said Scientology paid for everything. The argument is not paying attention to the fact. I'm just trying to read all of what they're saying here. So essentially, he's saying that the argument isn't legitimate and it could have been a portion, and William was indicated that the entire fees of Scientology were paid. So it's a bit of a throwaway stretch of an argument. The theory that Mr. Eckers shows up when Good live streams is not correct. Good seeks him out. Mr. Eckers only showed up 3 times. So the claim of stalking on Good's part are not legitimate. This is Hollywood Boulevard. My client isn't stalking Mr. Good. So he's trying to say Good was trying to indicate, but this is an interesting argument too. So he keeps saying, well, my client wasn't stalking Mr. Good. Streets LA never said there was any stalking. He simply said that Joey has made the effort to insert himself in his own space. William never once said there was harassment, never once said there was stalking. He just said there's been a concerted effort for Joey to gravitate towards Streets LA's space. So he's trying to say that Streets LA is making this traumatic, unfair claim. And that's what you kind of do as an attorney. You twist the words to make it seem like the opposing party is making these inflammatory actions. Therefore, you feel more sorry. The judge would feel more sorry for the person asking for the restraining order. Obviously, that's not the case. But if you could create this image that Street says this poor old man is harassing me and he's a harasser, then you might elicit sympathy from the judge. So they both use the Hollywood Boulevard argument, which is kind of interesting. And, says Joey's attorney, I agree with counsel. One of the worst things you could do is bring up somebody's deceased son. Good says first, go talk to your son. And my client simply reacted in kind. These are 2 men mirroring each other and saying hurtful things to each other. On the stand, Good says there is not an equivalence, but there is some. Which is interesting because the attorney, again, the attorney makes the argument on behalf of Street's counsel. The attorney circles this back into saying mutually assured destruction. These are simply 2 men mirroring each other. So if you want to look at how the verdict might come down, the judge will probably notice at least 4 or 5 contradictions that Joey's attorney has made. So in one breath, the attorney for Joey says there's this pattern of harassment. And then a few minutes later, the attorney says they're simply mirroring each other. So you got to pick a lane, bud. And the attorney for Joey says that's malicious intent. Saying I'm going to ruin your fucking life. That transitions into a threat. Mr. Good's counsel says January 17th was not an oral protest day. By the time my client showed up, this is at 1 a.m., no one was there. Just because William was live streaming doesn't mean it's a protest. Meaning that this whole act in question with trying to preserve the protest, the attorney's trying to say all this is bullshit because at 1 a.m. that wasn't a protest, so none of this counts, and he's trying to get the kids to follow the letter of the law. Well, we should just throw that all out the window. And the attorney goes on to say, Will filmed himself eating a sandwich and saying it's good. Is that protesting? So is that interfering with a protest? I don't think so. So meaning that the duration of he's filming, only a small segment is protesting. And in that moment, there was no interference. What's happening is somebody is trying to justify conduct that should not be allowed. Let's say Eckers did say stop protesting. Does that give them a right to shove a phone in their face? So that was the argument that he made, and then all the arguments are made, finally. And finally come to a conclusion. So again, guys, forgive me this little scattershot. Somebody commented that they didn't like that I gave a basic rundown and then read quote from quote, but I don't know. Tell me what you like better. Tell me if you think some of this was a little too scattershot, or if you like that, because I like to give the rundown and analysis, and then there's so much you just kind of need to read the paper and directly quote from it and then generate your asides. But I kind of like drumming up the bigger picture and giving my analysis and then kind of leading into the direct quotes. In other cases, it's not going to be so much quote heavy, so we won't have that same problem. But tell me what you thought of that, and yeah, thank you for watching, and I will see you a la mañana para dos DOA as well as Streets LA. Hasta luego.